I'm honored to be speaking today at the graduation ceremony of the class of 2020. Several months ago, when I was asked to be the commencement speaker, I never imagined that these would be the circumstances, that I would be speaking to an empty theater and the students and families would be watching from a video link at home. I had this whole spiel written, contrasting myself with the impressive speakers of the past. Janet Napolitano was one of them. None of that feels like it matters now. I have been deeply, deeply shaken by the events of the past few months. Over 100,000 deaths from coronavirus in the United States and counting, and of the past few weeks, the horrendous killing of George Floyd and numerous incidents of violence against peaceful protesters. I find myself at a loss now when tasked with imparting some wisdom or guidance on the class of 2020, when I myself feel so uncertain, overcome by a sense of the inadequacy of my actions, impotent in the face of the challenges before us. What gives me hope, one of the few things that does, is the knowledge that the class of 2020 hardly needs guidance from me. I know these students graduating today. I've taught most of them, I've interacted with all of them in some way, and I have always been blown away by their collective talent and character. These students are smarter than I was at their age, smarter than I am at my age, quite frankly. They are more ambitious, compassionate, politically engaged. They are generous, artistic, daring, self-confident, and on numerous occasions, they have surprised me with a wisdom that is almost inexplicable for a high schooler. Still, I will try my best to leave the class of 2020 with some final thoughts, a departing lesson, which I hope will be commensurate with their achievement as graduates. I'd like to start today by making a case for earnestness. It's unfortunately not the easiest quality to say, earnestness. Even more unfortunate is, given the current state of online discourse, of trolling, of owning your political opponents and clapping back on social media, it is a quality that is often in very short supply. So why do I think earnestness or sincerity of conviction is so important? As a nation, we face many present and potential challenges. These challenges aren't new necessarily. In fact, the most pressing one right now has its roots encoded in the very DNA of the country, when our founding fathers could not admit, failed to state, despite their lofty rhetoric about all men being created equal, that Black lives matter. No, these challenges are not new. Many of them are the same ones we've been grappling with for centuries. How do we guarantee equal rights and equal justice for all? How do we balance the competing interests of a diverse people who sometimes have legitimate opposing claims? How do we ensure collective action for the greater good of the nation, or even the greater good of the world, when doing so requires individuals to make sacrifices? Individuals whose isolated actions are neither wholly responsible for the problem at hand, nor wholly capable of solving it. I don't have the answers to these questions. What is obvious is there are very real problems that need solving in this world. And I'm convinced that we as a nation, as a people, will not be able to overcome our divisions and reach a consensus to solve them unless we can be open and honest about what we really think, what we really care about, unless we are sincere in our convictions, unless we are earnest. I don't think it's hard to understand why people sometimes obscure their deeply held convictions. Speaking openly about a sincerely held belief requires a willingness to make oneself vulnerable, to open oneself up for criticism. More challenging still is the inevitable need to articulate a defense of one's positions, which itself requires genuine introspection into the nature of one's beliefs. And, of course, most difficult of all, is accepting the possibility of having to change previously held positions in the face of persuasive counter-arguments. Oftentimes, rather than face the fear of criticism or the fear of self-doubt, it is tempting simply to feign agnosticism, to hide our viewpoints. We put up defenses, shield ourselves with words like, "it doesn't really matter," or "I don't really care." But we have little hope for finding resolutions to the challenges we face if we pretend that our beliefs are somehow unimportant. More insidious still is the lure of nihilism, the temptation to cast off previously held convictions or fake new ones simply to gain advantage in a dispute. I recognize there is a certain satisfaction in trolling, in sowing chaos through sophistry. This is the satisfaction of seeing a rival made to look foolish, seeing an adversary frustrated. But this type of victory is shallow at best, and worse, it threatens to undermine the very idea of open dialogue. You see, in order to troll, you must have already drawn a line between yourself and your target. You must have already decided to forego any real chance at connection, at persuading your interlocutor that your position has merits. Trolling doesn't require you have a position at all. It is nihilistic, the antithesis of earnestness. And it threatens to undermine the very notion of productive discussion and debate, one of our most important tools in working towards reconciliation. What we need from you, class of 2020, is to go out into the world and pursue each your own interests. Follow your passions, but do so with openness and honesty about your convictions. We need you to enter the political discourse, stand up, and courageously state, "This is what I want, and here is why." And when someone challenges you, when someone inevitably says that what you want is wrong, or the reason you want it is wrong, we need you to listen, probe your convictions, investigate your beliefs, and then reply and say, "This is now what I want," or "This is still what I want. And let me tell you why." What I'm asking, class of 2020, is that you set an example for the rest of us. Show us what it means to pursue your goals with honesty, with integrity. I care less about what those specific goals are and more about how you pursue them, because there's a high probability, possibly even a certainty, that at some point your aims will run counter to each other's and counter to mine. But I see little hope of us coming together to fix the great problems we now face unless we can speak openly and honestly about what we wish to achieve and why we wish to achieve it, unless we are earnest in our pursuits. I don't mean to sound Pollyannish. I'm not suggesting that earnestness is the single key to solving all of our collective global problems. The fact is, there will certainly come a time, class of 2020, when each of you will be confronted by a political, intellectual, or philosophical idea that challenges the claim to legitimacy, authority, or truth of your own. In these instances, earnestness can facilitate a productive debate, but it alone cannot resolve conflict. And yet, I see little hope of resolution without it. This brings me to my final piece of advice. When in the course of your lives, you are confronted by a particularly complex issue, the kind of issue where every side seems wrong and at the same time every side seems right, I urge you not to flee from the ensuing dissonance. Do not cast off complexity for the comfort of an easy answer or a simple narrative. Instead, embrace this discomfort. Allow yourself to feel it. Allow yourself to feel how the uneasiness of knowing there isn't a simple right or wrong challenges your prior assumptions, how it augments your argument. You needn't change your position necessarily, but neither should you beat a hasty retreat from the complexity of multiple points of view. Rather, embrace discomfort. Invite discomfort to reside within you and examine how your perspective abides in its company. As an example of what I'm talking about, consider the two most famous debaters in the Talmud, Hillel and Shammai. I can confidently say they're the most famous because, well, even I've heard of them. In Eruvin 13b, the Talmud tells us that for 3 years, the houses of Hillel and Shammai, the schools established by these wise men, for 3 years they argued over the law. until finally a divine voice proclaimed, Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim Chaim. Both these and those are the words of the living God. But, the voice continues, the law is in accordance with the house of Hillel. Well, how can both Hillel and Shammai be right? How can they both speak the words of the living God, and yet Hillel is more right? Thankfully, the Talmud gives us an answer. The text says that the house of Hillel was more sociable, more forbearing, and here's the important part for us. When the house of Hillel taught the law, it taught both the opinions of Hillel and Shammai. In other words, Hillel and his students did not retreat from the discomfort of multiple points of view. Rather, they leaned into this discomfort, and their interpretation of the law was the better for it. In summary, class of 2020, I leave you with two pieces of advice. First, be earnest in your pursuits. The world has enough cynics to last 2, maybe 3 generations. What we need are young people willing to go forth and work for change with the courage of their convictions. And second, do not avoid the discomfort of perceiving the world in all of its complexity. Your understanding of the world will only suffer if you cocoon yourself with a simple answer or an easy narrative for understanding things. Instead, embrace discomfort. Allow yourself to feel it. Let it be your ever-present companion, even as you decide that one perspective is more right than another, that Hillel is more right than Shammai. I know you, class of 2020. I know you can do this. I know you will do great things. Thank you.